This is Lynn Fraser. Welcome to the 2023 Radical Recovery Summit. I'm delighted this year again to have an in-depth conversation with Scott Kiloby. He's an innovator in the addiction field. He works with a zero tolerance on shaming, judging, and punishing people. He has an unconditional love and works with a trauma-first approach. He uses the Kiloby inquiries to heal the pain that drives addictive behavior in the first place. He is a well-respected enlightenment, nonduality teacher who has helped thousands of people all over the world. He's an entrepreneur, creative spirit, and a prolific author. In this interview, he talks about repression and how to free ourselves. Welcome, Scott. I'm so happy to be back doing another interview with you. And every year when we catch up, there's always so much depth and interesting kind of directions that you're going. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the repression work that you're doing and anything else that you'd like to share. So why don't you just go ahead and start wherever you want to start?
Deeper somatic work. It's my favorite subject now. Well, that's a really open-ended question, so I'll just kind of start somewhere and see what happens. You and I did an interview a few years back on the chronic pain, and I think I was somewhere in the middle of that process. So a lot has happened since then. So I had spinal stenosis, as I said in that interview, spinal stenosis and a bone spur protruding into my spine and in a bulged disc, which ended up being very painful. And this was before I had started doing the repression work. I didn't understand any of that yet. And so I was doing my best just to regulate it, manage it. And eventually I had to kind of step out of the spiritual context a little bit and start reading even more around trauma. And then John Sarno's book, Dr. John Sarno, and Alan Gordon's book, two books that were kind of pioneering this issue of pain being emotional. Alan Gordon talked about pain being fear, made a really good case of it. Sarno talked about pain being anger and fear, repression. And as I looked at the two, I did notice similarities because they were a little bit different, but I wanted to understand, are they both onto the same thing? And it felt like they were. And so I started to look at the pain as an emotional issue. I had to do some inquiry around that because there was still some programming that said this is physical. It can't be emotional. And when I believed that it was physical, there was no healing. That belief stopped me from exploring what it was. So I had to do some inquiry first on that to let go of that paradigm that this is all physical, that it's an abnormality in the spine, it's an injury. The pain is coming from the injury. It's not emotional, has nothing to do with the mind. I had to overcome a lot of those beliefs to even begin to develop this work or to even heal. So as I put that to rest a little bit, I just went to Sarno's work and said, okay, if there's anger repression here, how would I know? Because it's repressed.
Exactly.
So I just sat there for a long time using some of the tools that we had developed before that, like where we sat and line out words and pictures. Like, so I'd sit with the pain and what does this mean about me? And then some very surface stuff came up and I was looking at it. And I noticed it really didn't get to the core pain. It would give some relief, but something else going on there. So I started to entertain the idea, well, if it's repression, then it's not going to arise by some of those questions. Like maybe it's too intelligent for that. If it has protected me this long, would it be that easy to bring it up? Right. But I still became curious, is it possible to bring it up? Because if I don't bring it up, then I'm stuck with it. I'm stuck with the pain. So what I now know is what I was kind of doing is reestablishing an old mind-body connection with that. So if there's anger repression, my thought would be, if Sarno is saying it's a mind-body connection, where's the mind? Because I couldn't see it. And so I just felt the pain. And so it made sense to me that the mind and the body somehow had become, well, at least the unconscious mind behind it had just become so pushed back that it wasn't going to come up without specifically prompting it up. And I toyed with that in different ways, like how do you prompt that up? And eventually, because our tools are really so simple, I just said, well, this could be simpler than I think. So I started with things like a reverse inquiry where I would feel into the pain and say, pull up usually mom, dad, bullies, where it might be, right? There might be some repressed anger and bullying and all that. So I put those folks up in awareness and I would just start asking reverse inquiries like, I could feel and express anger to the bullies. And it'd be like, no. And I never asked that question before. I never did it with me to do before. So finally, I feel like I was making the first contact with that mind-body connection. It's like, where's this no coming from? That's mind. no. It was just like barely showing itself, but I could feel the energy getting activated when I would say, I could feel and express anger. The pain would just go, oh, like as if to say no, like we talk about inner child, like no, screaming no. At first, the skill was just if there's a mind body connection, can I just witness the no? Just witness it. And it was helpful to some degree, but I learned from that that there's something that you have to go deeper on. It's like there's an intelligence here. And that no is actually just responding to the inquiry. It's like if I say, do you want to go to the grocery store? And you say, yes. You're not really saying anything. You're just responding to an inquiry. So it's like if I were to ask you, what do you mean by yes? You'd say, well, I want to go to the store. It's just that simple. It's
Mhm.
like, what is this no saying? It's saying, I cannot express anger. That's what it's saying. I had to translate it. Even though when translating it, I went back to just witnessing it. And I started to realize that it's not a story, it's a mechanism. It's not just a story, I can't express anger. So with the teachings that said, or my own that said, just witness it, it's a story. It just wasn't enough. So eventually I started to learn how to rev that up to where that would come up into awareness more repeatedly. Like not as a story, but almost like a mechanism. Like, no, I can't express anger. No, I can't. No, I can't. It was like the beginnings of the work that we have now, but it was just barely contacting that mind, just a little bit. And I could feel the relief though. That's the thing. Very
Uh,
slowly, I was getting relief from that, but it felt like it was too slow. And it did take me a while to heal because of the skill wasn't there at that time. It was just barely starting to come up. And of course, now we have some really sharp tools around it. Slowly over about a 4 to 6 month period, not only did I make contact with these sort of deeper mechanisms, like I can't express anger, but also some things around shame that I hadn't seen. There were really deep, unconscious mind body connections around shame and joy repression. That was just something I didn't understand either, that the things like joy repressed can contribute to pain. And I found a lot of that. So I just worked with those areas skillfully, but not as skillfully as we do it now. So I think it took a little bit longer because I was just sort of
right.
finding my way. Near the end of the pain, we started to develop. This is really when the pain was almost completely gone, pain signal, but there was still some a felt abnormality in the spine. It was like a pressure. It was once nerve pain and very extreme pain. Through bringing the repression mind body connection, the pain signal just went away, the actual pain and the nerve pain. But the abnormality was still felt there as pressure because it's throttling my spine. From an MRI standpoint, if you see it, it's like throttling it, like choking it. So
Mhm.
that's what I'm feeling. But it wasn't producing because of the anger repression work. For some reason, it stopped producing the pain signal. And it was just this sensation. And so then near the end, I started to work with that and I felt like I needed to become even more skillful with it. So we started to develop different tools that would bring that mind body connection more online.
So we hear so much about the mind body connection, and there's so many layers in the mind. And
Yes.
what you're talking about is a kind of a survival strategy, a mechanism. S-
Yes.
But you said the part of the mind that actually relates to this was suppressed,
Yes.
right? Can you
Yes.
just say a bit more about that?
Yeah. It's a mystery, really. And the best I can say is I had to actually go read some of the literature to talk about what repression is. And they say it's different than suppression. So suppression would be like if I'm feeling anxious or sad and I'm consciously trying to stuff it down, like I'm aware of it. But then
Mhm.
they said there's something called repression, which is not even that at all. It's that it's not even allowed to come into awareness from the trauma. It's like the rage that I felt back then wasn't even allowed at all. And so that intellectually made me understand the mechanism that if it's not something that I had any consciousness of, is just how the system was protecting itself back then. And as best as I can tell, that's just, it has to remain unconscious in order to continue protecting us. Like it has to be something deep rooted so that we can respond immediately and not think about it.
And what
So,
would have happened if you hadn't repressed it? Like, what would have happened when you were
oh
dealing
my
with
God.
those bullies?
I don't even think I can't fathom that because it didn't feel safe at all. Like that wasn't even a possibility. I don't even remember that being a possibility. I don't remember the rage.
Right.
Yeah. if you read the trauma research or just people talking about trauma, if you back an animal to a corner into a corner, that's natural for that animal to be aggressive or right. So I was backed into a corner with the bullying, but where was the aggression? Where was that? It was just completely offline. So it made me understand there might be some programming around this stuff that just really is really offline. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know what your question was now that we've talked about it, but that's how I see it. It's just really offline.
I had a recent awareness around anger from my teenage years. So I had a lot of sexual trauma when I was a teenager, as you know. And I don't remember feeling angry about any of that either.
Mm.
And so I was kind of doing some of this work and sitting with it, and the anger was coming up, and I thought, where did that go? Like, what happened to that anger? We live in a rape culture. I was 12 years
Yeah.
old. I should be angry, you know? And yet I all of a sudden I just realized, when I was 25, 26, I got involved in the women's movement, and here comes that rage.
Mm.
And so it didn't linger there forever, but it went on pause for 13,
Yeah.
14 years,
Yeah.
and it comes, and then the level of rage that was coming out at that time was not completely appropriate to the situations I was in,
Right.
because it was from when I was a teenager, and I just didn't have any way to feel it, let alone express it.
Yes. I can relate
Interesting
to that.
how that
Yeah. There are
yeah.
different times when with gay rights activism, for example, like in the 90s, I would get really angry and I could tell that that was coming also from something. But other than that, it was more like, where's my anger? That's how it felt.
Mm,
The
yeah.
years like, where is that? And
Mm.
well, I found out where it was.
And then it also feeds into the whole spiritual bypassing, which you talk about so much. It's like,
Yep.
well, I don't get angry. I'm more evolved than that. That's why I don't feel angry. And how
Right.
do you even know it was there?
Yes, that's such a big topic, isn't it? Because I think that the spiritual message and even my own teachings, I like to point back to my own teaching to see how blind I was to it,
Mhm,
to
mm,
and how I was actually pointing in some ways away from people's repressions. Because I think that's what we do. It's like we can get to this state where we are awareness,
mm.
and there's just such peace in it too.
Yeah, there is.
There's a lot of peace in it, and
Yeah,
so it's easy just to hide in that, I think, and then to tell yourself that there's nothing underneath the peace or there's nothing buried in the stillness to look at.
right.
And so that is that's where I think for me the bypassing happened is just buying into that and then not digging under the surface to find out what was there and then paying the price for it, obviously, with the
Right.
pain.
So is your experience in awareness different now than it was before?
It
Now that
is.
yeah?
Yeah. I would just say it's energetic in the sense that with the spine, there was a lot of stuck energy there. And that energy, there's flow. So I don't feel so, and then therefore there's no fixation at all with that area. And I
Mhm,
could just say it feels more embodied, but that's a word that's hard to talk about. It's like it feels
mm,
because when you have that energy stuck there, there's just no flow in that area. And it's not just that my awareness is different, it's that my responses and how I respond to life is different, like just in different ways. Much less people pleasing and more just being, this is how I actually feel about something. And also much more openness to just, if there is an emotion there, just to share it with people that are close to me and not
mhm,
non-dual it away or spiritualize it away. Because I realized I did that for so many years of like trying to just explain things away or just come back to awareness and let things just settle and not deal with that. Like, oh, that was anger, but that's over or whatever. And I
yeah,
just learned what I think is what happens. It's the realization now is more about, I don't know how to say it, is making sure that we're embracing the human experience in its full spectrum. Message is about now is like, which parts of ourselves have we used the spiritual message to drown those parts out? And then now, can we come back home to those parts? Because those parts seem to be the ones that are festering for many of us, even on the spiritual path. Like they're, for some, it's turning into chronic pain or illness. Now we know
mhm,
other issues, like even mental health issues. So I just feel like the spiritual message ought to be inclusive of this because it has such like there's such a price to pay for this bypass. It's not just a novel thing. Like there's real people are having real issues. Like and now we
right,
know science that the repression trauma at least contributes in a big way to cancer and a whole host of things. So why
mhm,
would it be part of the spiritual message? Like it just doesn't make sense now to me.
right,
If it's affecting our health this much, or could, why wouldn't we? And that's why I want to conclude it now and talk about it.
mhm. We have stored trauma in our body. A lot of that turns up as pain.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is we're scared to go into the body because of the memories that might come along with when we go in.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
it seems to me that having this grounding and foundation and awareness and being able to stay in the present moment as we're doing this inquiry is very helpful in this work.
Mhm.
People who can't do that don't have that foundation.
Right.
So people who are doing this kind of work, you would think, would be better. We have a stronger foundation maybe to look at it from. Maybe not as much inclination because things can be pretty nice over here where it's all
Right.
bliss.
There's that too, yeah. That's the tricky thing about talking about it is those 2 sides of it. Because on one level, the peace is there and the awareness is there, and so it's like, why bother with some of that? Because it's okay until it gets bad enough. If it gets really bad, then you can't.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think awareness is a good foundation for this, and I also had not just the fear of going into the body, but, like, fear of if this anger repression lifts, they're not gonna like me.
Mhm.
They're not gonna love me, it's not gonna feel safe, so it was more than just, "I don't wanna feel it." It's like, "What's gonna happen if I do this?" And that I would
Right.
get stopped quite often on that point, and I can so that's part of the bypassing too, is, like, we're just afraid not just of feeling, but afraid of how it might affect our lives. You know, the programming told us when we were children that not repressing anger or whatever saved us, kept us safe. That
Right.
programming is still there. It's still here, you know, if there's repression. So that programming is what we're going to be encountering as we do repression work that says, don't do this.
Right.
And so if you listen to that voice that says, don't do this, it can stop you. I
Mhm.
think healing it, you know, so you have to be really skillful and understand that that's going to come up and work through it. It's not easy because the conditioning will say, no, I don't want to do this.
Well, and the evidence is that when you're a child, you have to maintain whatever you can for a relationship with your parents. That's
Yeah.
survival. And when
Mhm.
you were with those bullies, if you had fought back, you probably would have been killed.
Oh gosh, yeah, it's not
So
even
what's true as a child, though, is not true as an adult,
right.
right? And so that's the trick is our system doesn't seem to get it that
Mhm.
we're not back there anymore.
Yes.
We have more resources now. We have something's not working out well, we can move out. We have different resources as an adult. Yeah.
Yeah, but even knowing that, the
Yeah.
child in me is saying,
The child
you
in
know
you yeah,
right,
yeah,
right,
yeah,
was saying something else, but yeah, we do have different resources, and you're right, the system, the unconsciousness doesn't understand yet. It doesn't have there's somehow a disconnect or something between what we know in our adult life and the
yeah,
information of the child is still acting on, "No, I can't, it's not safe." It's just so simple. It's just saying that.
yeah,
Even as we're seeing that we have other resources, it's still saying that. So that's the tricky part. That's why I think it is really somatic work because we have to contact that voice and hear it and allow it and
mm,
not just, just stuff it back down and try to cope from
yeah,
awareness with it, you know?
yeah. So why don't you talk a little bit more now about the tools as they develop, as you worked with them and what they are like now?
Well, it's almost like breaking some of the own rules of my own inquiry in a way, because before we developed the newer tools, it was just about pulling something up and witnessing it. What we're doing now is we're learning to voice that what you could say the inner child or voice the repression mechanism. Now, this is more like I would feel like, I don't know, if Carl Jung was alive, I'd like to talk to him and say, see what you think about this,
Right,
you know?
right.
Because when I was contacting these thoughts, which would barely come up, like I can't express anger, the witnessing just didn't go deep enough because I saw it was a mechanism. It wasn't just a story or words. So, how would you make a mechanism conscious? That's different than us making a story conscious. Like if I say, when I say story, I mean like, I don't know, some story that comes up. You can kind of just see sometimes the words of the story or just be with them and whatever energies with them kind of just falls away with it. But the repression wasn't like that. When I would witness the story that I can't express anger, it would kind of fall away, but the pain wouldn't be that affected by it. It was so what do we have to do here? And what I learned is like, can we voice it? So we conjure it up. I can't express anger. And we get that. It's like we poke the bear of the somatic thing a little bit. We have to poke it,
Mhm.
you know, to make that story or that mechanism come up. And what we started doing is repeating it consciously within awareness, the command to hold back anger, for example. So the inquiry might look something like this if you were watching it. It'd be like feeling into pain or contraction and saying, I can get angry at them. No. What does the no mean? I have to hold it back. 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 But it's doing it skillfully with the energy and the hold back mechanism are like one thing. It's not like, it doesn't feel like two things. It feels like the pain and the mechanism are the same thing. But now it's being made like super conscious. It's not hiding anywhere. It's not just being witnessed every now and then. It's being spoken in awareness. And somehow when the mind comes online, it's now in agreement with the body. See, the body's saying, I can't hold back anger. Now the mind is in agreement with it. So we poke the bear and agree with it. And somehow in agreeing with it, because all up until that point, what I was doing was not agreeing with it. See, I was trying to get away from it by telling stories or just staying unconscious to it or even resting as awareness. Not, and this is different. This is understanding that it's a mechanism that runs like a continuous trauma response. It's going like this. So how would you bring that in the mind that mimics that? It would be more like a continuous trauma response or command that's being voiced. And so therefore it's not hiding at all. It's just right there. You can hear it. And as you keep it online, it metabolizes the energy more, we found. So it just moves energy more. And it also regulates the system. Because a lot of times I think we're dysregulated because we're trying to do something other than what the body's saying. The body's saying I have to hold back anger. And we're trying to go, I'm not going to go there about the anger. I'm going to just try to feel better and make this feel okay. And then in doing that, the mechanism is still offline. So by bringing it online, somehow there's an agreement between the mind and body, and that metabolizes the energy. And I don't know the science behind it yet. I can't tell you what's happening. I just know in direct experience we're seeing it happen.
Right.
And so once we started doing what we call intentional rapid fire, which is rapidly firing a command from the nervous system, like I have to hold back, we started seeing energy metabolize for people much quicker. And also, they started to feel regulated from the inquiry. For the first time, when we did the rapid fire, people were saying, not only does that metabolize the pain more, or the energy or the contraction, but also I feel calmer after. So somehow it was doing both. And that was the first time that our inquiries were really doing both. Because before, when it was in a less skillful state, it was definitely metabolizing energy, but sometimes people were feeling a little bit dysregulated from it after. But somehow when we brought the continuous trauma command into consciousness, it was also regulating for people. So by regulating the nervous system, people could go deeper into metabolizing energy. They wouldn't get stopped by it, right? And so before that, people would get stopped, and we would say regulate your nervous system in different ways, which sometimes people still have to do. They just have to regulate it. But what we're learning now is the dysregulation comes sometimes for when these energies come to the surface. The dysregulation comes because the mind-body connection isn't being made, even in the dysregulation. So, for example, when I was doing anger repression work, anxiety would come up for me. That's the fear that's holding the repression down. So I'd feel anxious. And when I first started helping, I thought, okay, I need to regulate this. But what I learned was, no, I need to understand what it's saying. It's not happening by itself, the fear. And I would learn like, oh, it's not safe. I'm not safe, or whatever it is. But I didn't just witness it. It was like, let's bring that into awareness. It's not safe. It's not safe. It's not safe. And then that would, again, the energy of the terror or whatever was coming up would settle and metabolize more. So I just think it's taking people into deeper into the somatic experience and not getting stopped and just regulating. It was just fine. But what we found is that the regulation sometimes is the safety mechanism inside coming to the surface and saying, this isn't safe. I have to stop, regulate.
Right.
Well, that's fine. But at the same time, we have to go deeper because trauma is not being healed for a lot of people. Right. So if we just regulate, how do we get to the healing? And we're still just learning how to move through those states now more through bringing the unconscious mechanism to the surface, no matter what it's saying. And I think that's the work now. That's as best as you can explain it without doing it, right? Like there's skill involved for sure. It's skillful.
It seems like on a couple of different levels with the mind. So part of the mind, what we tend to do is go into the adult self and say, hey, you're safe now.
Yes.
It's okay. It is actually safe. So the energy is saying, I'm not safe. I'm not safe. I'm not safe.
Yeah.
Your higher level mind's going, well, I can look around the room. I can look for cues of safety. I can do box breathing. I can do all those things that regulate. But I wonder if it's kind of the energy or the mechanism is interpreting that as they don't believe me.
Yeah.
Like we're
Well,
trying
yeah.
to talk ourselves out of it.
Yes. That's what I countered. I think that's true. That's a good way of saying it. There's something that we're trying to articulate around safety and resistance and regulation in KI that I think will be helpful for people is just like that. It's like this disconnect between the adult mind and the child in a way. Like the adult mind can see, or the awareness can see, I'm safe, but that doesn't matter to that child in a way. You can regulate that child back down,
Hmm.
make that quiet from the adult practices and seeings and things. But does that mean that that goes away? And so if we're not dealing with the mind body connection directly, and we're going to be regulating for a long time, right? Because we have to kind of pull that child or push that child back down, or that voice back down, and that energy. So what I learned is to do the opposite, to bring that thing up, make it super conscious instead. And that became more regulating than anything I was doing in the end, like just more regulating than any of the things that I was doing. And so that also helps with the healing because then you don't get stopped along the way. The adult mind doesn't have to come in and try to explain things away or regulate. You just go right to the child or the voice and hear it. And then by giving it the space and awareness to be heard, made conscious, metabolizing of energy again and regulation
It's supposed
happens.
to happen. Right.
Yeah. But there's still a need to regulate. Sometimes there is because that's a skill that we want
Oh,
to.
absolutely. Yeah. 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 Because if we can't regulate, we just get sucked into this vortex of traumatic memory and it feels really hopeless. And it's like, I can't do that.
Yes. And people might leave the work then, see, so that we need to learn how to regulate so that they can just, because the resistance that comes up can be so big, they'll be just like, I don't want to do this work.
Right. Or I
Right.
can't do this work. I
Yeah, it's
won't
too
survive
much.
doing this work. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And those
Right.
are real feelings that come up for people. They came up for me. I don't want to do this. I
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. Yeah. So when somebody's doing this, when you're doing that rapid fire, the intentional rapid fire, so what you're kind of doing is agreeing with the energy. It's like,
Hmm.
I'm not safe. I'm not safe. So you're saying,
Hmm.
yeah, you're not.
Right. Right. But here's the thing. When people hear that, they might say, well, then aren't you just identifying with that? And then
Mhm.
doesn't create, but that comes from not doing the work because when you actually do it, you find something else happens. But the mind would say, that's scary if you're just going to take the voice of that younger child, you're just going to work yourself into. But there's something else that happens though when you bring awareness to it. So it's not just sitting here saying, I'm not safe, I'm not safe, I'm not safe, which in a way that's disconnected from the body, because that could send you into tailspin. So there's skill involved. And one of the ways we say it is like this energy where you feel it in the body is, and the command or the words are like a galaxy, and you want to be aware of the entire galaxy as you're doing it. You don't
Mhm.
want to be spinning out over here, I'm not safe, I'm not safe, in a way that's disconnected because there's a mind body connection. So
Right.
bring awareness to that. Somehow that's what's metabolizing the energy. It's being done in awareness. There's still the awareness piece of this. It's just there's also a continuous response happening in awareness in the mind. Yeah. It's hard to explain, but you just do it, you can see.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
when you're doing that rapid fire, are you kind of doing it from the sensation? Like you're staying in connection with the sensation?
Yes, because no matter what I would say in my conscious mind during the pain, the voice of the pain had its own agenda. So I had to listen to it. But the problem is that if you sit and very quietly listen to a sensation or something, it might not produce that. See? So it's really hidden. That's the thing. So it's more than just listening because I was listening for about a year and a half and I never heard this. So I
Right.
had to prompt it up. And then once I prompted it up, then yeah, I'm speaking the voice of that energy into awareness. Like it's almost like the young Scott is just coming forth in awareness to be himself. He's saying, I'm safe and I'm honoring that. Okay. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm not safe. I'm not safe. Honoring that. Let it be heard. And somehow by being heard and not stuffed down or
Right.
regulate out of experience, the somehow, as we know, when you bring things into awareness, they start to transmute. That's the
Right.
spiritual, right?
Mm.
We put
Right.
the two together. Now we have trauma working within the spiritual context, which is nice, like trauma resolution
Right.
working in awareness. But it has to happen a different way. You can't just sit. I don't think you can sit and listen to a pain or a contraction and just hear this in the way that it's running. It's running very, very unconsciously. So I had to prompt it up, is what I'm saying, not just hear it and I had to re-prompt it up and re-prompt it up because it wanted to hide. But when I would prompt it up and take the voice, that's when the energy would shift more.
So if you weren't prompting it, you would go into awareness more quickly?
When I wasn't prompting, it was just awareness there. You
Just
know, yeah, it's just quiet, awake awareness and pain,
and
you
pain.
know. Mhm.
Right.
I wasn't able to use some of these finer techniques until the very tail end of the healing. I would love to have worked with it in the beginning, but now other people are coming to the work who are right in the midst of pain, and so they're reporting that the rapid fire is working much more quickly and more skillfully. Yeah.
Okay. So what's going on in your spine now? Does it look the same on an MRI as it did
I
before?
I don't know. I want to get an MRI. I do.
Okay.
It feels totally different. Totally different. There's just flow all the way through the spine. There's no blockage. There's barely a sensation where the pinch is. I can barely feel it. It's not painful at all. It's not even uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So it feels good. It feels really good, actually.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I know that pain was very extreme.
it was bad.
Yeah,
I was suicidal, as you know, at
yeah,
points. That was really bad.
yeah. What's a way into this? I know that you have a number of facilitators that they can work with.
I think there's a step before that for people. I mean, some people are just ripe for this message. They're like, "Oh, yeah, that's what I've been missing." But
Mhm,
other people have to like work up to it. So sometimes they'll just have to read some of my posts or watch the videos and argue with me a little bit in their mind. And but then eventually they go, "Okay, there's something here." Now that I hear him explain it, and then it's almost like a pre-contemplation that I see people go through because we're dealing with a lot of resistance around this one.
mhm,
And so the way in is, I think, first might be here to understand it, hear it, and
mhm,
something about understanding and hear it might make them feel a little safer around it
mhm,
and the context, right? And then it's yeah, the best way to do it is to work with a facilitator, I think. Yeah, we're doing the work in the members area,
mhm,
obviously in meetings and stuff, which is helpful. Go in there and listen to us and learn the tools. But if you're dealing with a lot of trauma or repression or pain or illness, you might want to work with somebody who's trained in it, like can really show it to you. And so the
okay,
facilitators, it can be found at kiloby.com. Well, I'll tell you this is that the work has developed into not just repression work. It's we're now contacting the mind or reestablishing mind body connection over deep shame that wasn't otherwise
mhm,
discoverable in just resting as awareness or meditation or whatever. And trauma commands, that's another part of it. Like it's not just that the mechanism of holding back emotion, but we're the fight, flight, freeze response, fawn too, but
mhm,
fight, flight, freeze, especially, those also have correlates in the unconsciousness. So for example, a child doesn't understand fight, flight, freeze, right?
right.
I don't remember hearing any of that or knowing
No,
what
it
was
just
that.
happens.
Right. It just happens. But as we go back in inquiry, like for example, just seeing different memories, now with the skill, I've been able to see that like with certain memories, there was a trauma response, but it didn't come up as fight or flee. I had to prompt it up, and what it would be is things like get away, 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 get away. And
Mhm,
I would find these were running similar to the repression. They're running continuously, just like the research says. The
mhm,
body's like running like that. Like state, it's almost like you're carrying around all the time that you don't
right.
even realize, right? It's not safe. It's not safe. I have to go. I have to get away. I have to get out. Yeah,
Unconscious neuroception. Yeah, we don't know
yeah.
what's happening. Yeah.
We don't know. But with this inquiry, we can see it happening now. We're now seeing it like it's literal. It's like, oh, get away, get away, get away, get away, get away, get away, get away. And that's metabolizing energy because these trauma imprints and programmings are part of the pain. It was part of the pain for me,
Right.
or yeah.
Mhm,
And then also shame. We've been working with shame for a long time, but it's a really deep layer for people, as you know,
mhm.
right? And so this is another area is contacting the programming that's really unconscious around that, making that conscious to metabolize that energy, those layers also. Similar process.
So if we have a story, we have experiences and then we form beliefs because of those experiences. So I have a belief or I have an experience of being shamed, and then I come to the belief there's something wrong with me. We can also have those experiences around I was in this situation and I froze, but really I think I should have gone into fight.
Hmm.
This is very common, especially with sexual assault. I should have fought back.
Yeah.
It's partly my fault because I didn't fight back. How would you work with something like that in terms of do you work with the beliefs around it, like the beliefs themselves first and then go, or is it kind of a combination?
We definitely have to deal with some of the beliefs, the surface layer beliefs around like judging yourself or questioning what you did before we can get to the actual mechanism. The mechanism was before the belief. It's just like I have to run, I have to run, I have to run. I can't do this. I can't express this. That's where we want to go. But
Mhm.
before might be some judgments and stories around it that we have to look at. I've had beliefs. One of the beliefs is this is physical, it's not emotional. So that's a belief that
Well, you had
I
evidence. You had an MRI that said this is physical.
exactly. I didn't think it was a belief. That's the thing.
Right,
Right.
right.
And I think we have to deal with those things that we're taking to be reality that are a belief
Uh,
that might also be stopping us from that deeper work. Like, the beliefs can stop us. The shame of believing I needed to fight back might stop us from actually going to the actual response that
mm,
happened, which was
right.
fleeing. Right. So not everybody can go straight to repression. They have to deal, as we know, with some of the stuff on the surface. Yeah.
So do you still work with core deficiency beliefs?
I do, but we're working with that differently in the sense that people have called it a fixation. Different books like Eli Jackson Bear talked about it as a fixation. And I think we're contacting for some people that fixation mechanism. On the surface, it comes up like, I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable. But we're down in the part of the trauma, it's often part of our trauma response too. Like,
Mhm.
develop these identities as part of, we couldn't be ourselves when we were kids. So
Right.
we're deficient. We now think we definitely work with that story, but we're working with it also as, is it a fixation? In other words, do you have to believe this to survive? In other words, when you go back, I went and found with the shame the story that I'm disgusting from being gay. It was a very early story.
Mhm.
It was so buried.
Right.
But what I also found, I would reverse that and say, I don't have to be, or I don't have to see myself as disgusting. Yeah, you do. Yes.
Right.
Have to be, you have to be, you have to be. And it's almost like this a similar mechanism from trauma. It's almost like I have to. Somehow that kept me safe. If I see myself as disgusting, I won't put myself out there.
Yeah.
I'll stay, you know what I mean? I'll stay safe. So we're working with those deficiency stories at a little bit different level too, more like as almost like a similar nervous system response of
Mhm.
we have to believe ourselves to be this way to stay safe or to protect ourselves or to get love. And working with that at that unconscious level, it feels more like a mechanism like, no, I have to, I have to, I have to, I have to. And I feel like that's going to help people a lot because a lot of people are just dealing with what I'd say like the effects of it. So they're not aware of the mechanism running like that. I
Uh,
have to. And they just see I am not good enough.
right.
I am but under that might be, I have to, I've had to believe that to survive, to stay safe. That's not being contacted. So we're trying to contact that now. We are contacting that now more
Right.
directly.
Right. So we're going from that level of the mind that thinks or that holds beliefs to where that belief is connected with that protective mechanism.
Yeah, which is unconscious. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah. So I think what people are dealing with spirituality, if they're lucky, they see the deficiency stories because even those can be, the story itself can be unconscious. Like when you get triggered by someone, we've known this in our work for years. We tend to focus on the other, right? Like
Right.
they did, blinding ourselves to the story that I'm feeling unheard or unlovable. That can even be unconscious for people. The fact that there is an identity there, but then under that, there could be a fixation with that. Like I have to be that is not being seen.
Mm. Yeah.
Uh,
Like I can't afford to not believe this.
I have to. Yeah, I
I
have
have
to
believe
stay
it.
safe.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it
Yeah.
just wouldn't be safe not to believe it.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Or I can't survive without believing that I am that. It's a survival almost mechanism.
Yeah, so we're working with really deep conditioning that
Yeah,
is tightly connected with our survival.
highly connected,
Right.
very tightly connected. But I think that's why the healing is happening because this is the deeper stuff that's in the body that's really apparently manifesting as these other things like, PTSD, addiction, chronic pain,
Right.
body contraction that persists after years of practice, right?
Right. Mhm.
Right. Mental
Yeah.
health issues. We know that a lot of repression and trauma is creating mental health issues. So there's an inroad here into something, I
Mhm.
think, right?
Right. Right.
Still developing it, but it's exciting.
Mhm. It
Yeah,
is. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is.
So when you're working with something like our experience with anger, for instance, do you wanna talk a little bit more about anger and how you're working with that?
Yeah. Well, a lot of folks are coming from the spiritual world who didn't realize they were repressing anger. And, there's a lot of things that come up from that. Like we talk about people pleasing, going along with, being agreeable, being a peacemaker, or yeah, not setting boundaries. That's another thing.
Hmm.
Not expressing what you really want and need in a relationship or whatever, just your voice is offline. We found a lot of that connected to the anger repression. So that as the anger gets lifted and made conscious, the repression mechanism, you start to see changes in your relationships, which people will say, oh, am I just going to be an angry person then? Well, no, because it's not about identifying with it. It's not
Right.
about pulling up and now being an angry person, but it's not, it's just no longer hiding that from yourself, bringing that into awareness. And so as the anger comes up, it is going to come up, but it doesn't mean you have to put it on someone. You may, but
Hmm.
it's going to come up because we're doing repression work. There's no way.
Right.
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 So when it starts to come up, people are starting to see that a lot of their interest in spirituality and sometimes even toxic positivity and is coming from the repression. So there's lots of people that have been in the non-dual and the enlightenment thing who didn't see this part, just like I didn't see it. And that's now causing them suffering. If it's not chronic pain or illness, it's going to be they're in a relationship where it's not working because they're repressing themselves and it's not really an authentic relationship
Right.
and they
Hmm.
know it. And so they're being drawn to the work for that. And then there's a lot of resistance, obviously, when they come, but they're open, to work with it. So I don't know what you were asking in terms of tell me more about the anger repression, but that's the beginning of it.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, there's a real life cost when we actually start to get in touch with what is really going on.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of positive things happen. Like, for instance, you might show up more authentically and actually have an authentic relationship. Um,
Yes.
but you also might kind of wake up and go, I don't want to be in this relationship. This isn't who I am. That's kind of where I was towards the end of my relationship. It was like, her life is working really well in this relationship, but I'm not living my life. I'm making her life better. And
Yeah.
it's not working for me. And so, I didn't have young kids. I had the financial resources to leave. So at that point, once I made the decision, I was able to leave quite easily in a way. But, if I had young kids, if I didn't have any money, there's a lot of things that can make it really feel like I can't afford to see the truth.
Yes. And so trauma bonding, you talk about it that way. I think
Yeah.
some people think of trauma bonding as just like toxic relationship or, the subject of abuse or something, but it can also be inauthenticity in a relationship.
Mhm.
You're not actually being yourself. You can't. And that's having an effect on the relationship.
Kills the relationship, I think,
Yeah. And
because
it's a
it's not a
trauma.
real relationship.
No, it's not. And you could say it's a trauma bond. And
Yeah.
so as you start to do repression work, the bonds, you start to see it and it might not feel right to be in that
Right.
relationship anymore. And that's a good thing, actually.
It is.
Be-
Yeah, yeah,
right? Because if
yeah.
it's not authentic, it's probably time to do some transformation and move on if that's not the right relationship. And that scares people though, right?
Yes, yeah.
You're bonded with someone through your trauma. It's scary to start looking at that because you might lose them. And that comes up too, like they're not
Yeah,
going to love anymore. But this is all part of our growth and transformation, isn't it? Like it's just all
yeah,
part of it. And
yeah.
sometimes relationships fall by the wayside or you leave them as part of the growth or transformation.
Or it can deepen, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right. And
yeah.
more often
Depends on the relationship, on the other person,
does
if
some work.
they yeah, does some work. Yeah, yeah,
Hopefully. Some
yeah.
work. Yeah.
So where do you see this going? Like, this just seems to be getting deeper and deeper. Do you feel like you're at the deepest part yet, or is there
Well,
more to come?
I can never say that because every time we thought so, it's like something else happens. So I don't
Right.
know. But we're at a place, we're in a really good place with the work now because it's really helping people. So I'm just staying open, and at this stage, it feels like you're learning as much as anything I'm learning. You
Mm,
know, this is an uncharted territory to some degree, at least in my work, it is.
yeah,
So part of it is just doing the work with people and learning somehow what works and what doesn't. And then somehow something gets evolved from that learning. I don't know. And so I'm just staying open. But right now we're at a place where it's working really well.
mhm,
But I just
right,
want to say that's the end of it. We don't know.
right, right.
Right.
So in your personal body, you don't have any pain anymore.
None. No pain.
That's amazing.
Not only no pain, it just feels good. My body feels great now.
Mm,
And it didn't feel good for many, many years. So that's another thing. It's not just about having no pain. The joy came up for me more than ever.
Mm-hmm.
That's something. Another thing, it was like when I first had the non-dual realization, it did feel joyful for a few years. It was supposed to feel light. It's just
Mm-hmm.
like, but I didn't realize I was repressing joy still on that unconscious level. So this is the great thing, is by bringing the anger to the surface. Suddenly, I wasn't even looking for it. The joy repression work started to come in because they were like somehow connected from the trauma. Because not only could I not be angry, it was the joy that got me in trouble. Like the joy of being this little gay kid who just wanted to create and be sensitive and be an athlete too. It's not allowed. You can't like be
Right.
an athlete hanging with the wolf pack and still have this sensitive feminine side or
Right.
joyful side. It just wants to play. So that
Mm-hmm.
just got shut down and contained in the pain too. So you can't really heal pain without going through all those repressions because one connects to the other. And so then
Mm-hmm.
that's been that's another thing. It's just the joy is here. I'm just enjoying life like never before. And I can't put words to it other than it had to do with that repression. Something was being held down. It didn't feel safe.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I'm still somewhat at the tail end of that work with joy repression. There's a little bit left. There's no pain. I'm just looking at some of and it's just been fruitful. It just seems like it just continues to unfold. So it's like more than willing to do it and just see where it goes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Part of what you were being targeted for was your joy and creativity and sensitivity. So we learn that that's part of what we can't afford to show.
Yes.
So it makes sense that we need to do something around. I mean, a lot of it will just release on its own, I think, but
Yeah.
uh, mm,
Well, I found very specifically, like when I would go into inquiry around that, I can be joyful around them. Like the no was as strong as it was with anger. No, they'll kill you. They'll kill you.
right,
You know,
right.
I just had to stay with it, like really, really stay with it because it could easily just like it doesn't feel safe. Joy
Mhm,
doesn't feel safe. It's strange. Like what? But
mhm.
to that child, that feels true.
Right,
That you've
right.
got to stuff that down. And I would see actually memories. So in the joy repression, for example, I saw memories of creating an art project or coming to school with a teddy bear or a stuffed animal or wearing clothes that weren't typically male at that time.
Mhm.
Or, some older lady looked at me and called me Scott Trina. And
Mhm.
like that memory, I learned in all those memories, you don't show that side of yourself. And over time, that side of myself just went,
It just gets completely squashed, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I had to go back to all those memories and find that joy repression, bring that to life.
Mm, mhm.
Yeah.
One of the things I think is so exciting about the whole movement now around non-binary and getting rid of the gender binary, getting rid of conditioning, seeing through conditioning around sexuality, gender identity, all that, is that people are free to actually express themselves, whatever it is that's coming up. And I know we're not there yet, obviously. There's an openness here it's exciting to think about. For you and I, we grew up in a time when we weren't allowed. I didn't even know I was a lesbian until I was in my mid 20s.
Mhm,
And looking back, I can say, okay, yeah, I could see. But,
mhm.
it just wasn't in the realm of possibility. So one of the things I like about Alok Ved Menon and some of that conversation that's happening now around the gender binary is that it frees people to explore a little bit more of who we really are.
Yes.
Who am
Yeah.
I without that label of man or woman? What does non-binary mean? What does it mean to be and to just explore that? I think that's so exciting that
Beautiful.
that's something possible for younger people and older people too, but
Yeah.
especially younger people now. And people are complaining, it's like, oh my gosh, who are they? They're this way one day and that way another day. And I'm just like, that's great. They're just
Yeah.
exploring. Yeah, let them be.
Yes. And the younger generation is teaching us around that too. If you know
Mm,
social media, like the
yeah.
younger, like Harry Styles, who's this pop artist,
Mhm,
dresses as a woman sometimes, and people love it, And then Caitlyn Jenner came out as trans and
mhm.
very popular. So it goes around and people take her picture. So our culture is definitely changing.
Changing. Mhm.
But I still think there's going to be some work that people are going to have to do because, in
Yeah.
some cases, because that gets repressed too, that part of ourselves. And so that could be part of the work is like acknowledging that first within ourselves. If we can't, then it becomes difficult. And it was difficult for me to welcome that part of myself until I did that work. I mean, other people may have a different process where through over time, they don't do inquiry. but somehow they come to terms with that. But for me, it was so repressed with everything else because I was traumatized around that. Like that part of me was pounced on by those bullies. So I had to specifically go into that trauma in order to be more open to this part of myself or these aspects of myself that are not male or female or both. You know, it's like they don't, who I am I can't put it anywhere in a box, you know, and I'm sure you can relate to that somewhat, you know, you can't really put it out there.
Yeah. Our brain is so highly associative, and anything that's associated with danger, we're going to try and keep that down. So it's great if we're associating wonderful things. You know, we see someone we love, or our dog comes over for a hug or whatever, and we bond to that. I mean, that's partly association. We know that we're going to get a cuddle and it's warm and it's fun, But then the energy that goes into keeping us safe seems to have a lot more commitment. It's like that's the hill we die on. I am going to keep myself safe no matter what. And I don't care if you're happy. I don't care if you're who you are. I don't care anything. I'm just going to stay safe.
Exactly. Yeah. I think about not just gay and lesbian people, but again, trans people, because we're at this place where you see it on television a lot. Parents don't know how to deal with that. They don't know how to deal with that child. And they probably don't understand how damaging it is to not accept that child. Because that child learns that it's not safe to express this. This is what I am.
Yeah,
that's not safe. I think we have work to do still.
I agree.
There's more work to do, but it's definitely changing. It's nice to be alive now to watch it changing.
It is. Yeah. I have a grandchild who's non-binary, and their experience coming out is completely different than it would have been even 10 or 20 years ago. And it's completely different because of the family they're in. They have a lot of support in the family, and
that matters.
They don't have to fight every battle themselves. They have, their dad and their mom will also step in and go, back away.
Yeah.
The right name, use the right gender. You can figure this out, like to grandparents, other grandparents and stuff,
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see the difference when a child is actually validated for expressing who they are.
It's really important, isn't it?
Really important.
The more I do this work, I see, and I'm not a parent, so I have to be careful here, but because I know it's challenging to be a parent, but when your child presents something that's different about them, how you respond to that is everything. Because you could actually be inadvertently traumatizing that child for a lifetime of suffering, just by not accepting the child. Now, it might be trans, but it could also be your child is different in some other way. Autism, something else. And so every message that we send to a child is downloaded by that child, whether it's safe to. And so we have to be really careful of the message we're downloading these children. And I know it's challenging to be a parent. It's more complicated than that. But hopefully, if you can imagine a scenario where children are born and who they are or how they show up is just okay. But so much trauma gets dealt with through that. It's just, just being accepted for who you are. And we just don't have that society yet where we're conscious enough to do that completely, but we're getting there.
We're closer than we were. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Scott. It's been a pleasure talking with you, as it always is. So Kiloby.com is the portal for everything.
It's the portal for everything. Let me explain a little bit. When you go to Kiloby.com, if the members area, because people, it's a community, a social media platform that's offline. You can't just go in there. You have to be a member. But that's where we're doing the work. And people, what's good about that community is not just the meetings that we do a lot, but also people are feeling really free to share stuff that they don't feel like they can share in other places about whatever, shame, sexuality, trauma that's unresolved. So it's a cathartic place too, where people can just share stuff that they can't share. And then obviously we're doing the deep inquiry work there too. So if people can't afford sessions, what I say is go there. It's very affordable, like $50 a month. And you get like meetings all the time with this work, and you can learn the work that way. But if anybody resonated with really wanting to do the deeper work, I would say, go to Kiloby.com and work with one of the facilitators. Of course, Lynn, you do this work too, so they can find you.
More in groups and classes now than individually, but it's really powerful work. Yeah, it's beautiful. So they can get to the members area through Kiloby.com.
Yeah, it's right there. In fact, as soon as you pull up, there's a call to action right there. Click on it.
Thank you for watching the Radical Recovery Summit 2023. To watch more of the interviews and the clips and to share with your friends, please go to radicalrecoverysummit.com.